Hey, it's Disorganized Play. Hey, let's get together today. Hey, for some Dungeons and Dragons. What do you say? Hey. Click. All right, not my greatest. I didn't put anything out for any requests, so I guess that's due for me. Hey everyone, welcome to Disorganized Play. I am your host and dungeon master, Tom Lommel. I am broadcasting live from the depths of my apartment. Welcome aboard. We have a couple, I think, interesting topics today to discuss. Every week, I prep a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Every Wednesday, I run that game of Dungeons and Dragons right here on Saving Throw Show, and every Thursday I come back and talk about what went right, what went wrong. No, that's right. Okay. And what could have gone differently. So I'm not sure if Dom is joining us or not. Let me ask him over the Slack. He is having some... That is not what I wanted to type. Stream. All right. This is a DM prep and advice show. I don't get too deep into the nuts and bolts of what the actual session is going to consist of. For one thing, I want to have some surprises for you guys. For another thing, I like to procrastinate and wait until the last minute to prep everything. So mostly this is talking about like what are my thoughts, what are the issues that are currently going on in the campaign, what is the arc of the adventure, and how do I wed those to successful outcomes for the party going on an ongoing basis. So it's not, you're not going to sit here and come up with encounters with me. We're going to talk about what are the issues that are in play, how do I want to address them, and then that also bleeds over into some general GM advice. So it's really more of a like, what's the thought process? What's the prep to the prep, right? How do I prioritize what I need to prep? That's the format of the show. For those of you who are new, I don't know that anyone is. For those of you who are not new, that's why it's called Disorganized Play, DJ Phoenix, is it's to make you feel good about just what a terrible job you do too. And I mean that literally. I don't mean that I mean that sincerely. I don't mean that as like a snide comment. No, like I want you all to appreciate the fact that I go through the same struggles that you do sometimes. So let's all learn from our mistakes together, shall we? All right. Welcome aboard, DJ Phoenix. Good to see you. So we're going to cover really just two topics today. Maybe we'll have some time for questions. I doubt it, because this 5 questions you should ask about every encounter is a really big topic, and I think we're going to get a lot of juice out of that one. And pinging plot radar will take some time, but I think the majority of our hour together will be focused on this 5 questions topic. And I think you'll find that enlightening. It's something that I thought about this morning that I'm still fleshing out, but I like where it's at. It converges with my idea of like what's the purpose of an encounter, right? It ties into that. So, with that being said, let's delve into Plot Radar. For those of you who are new, I'll just briefly explain that Plot Radar is a way to track story elements that have been introduced in the campaign or are on the horizon, because we've read the adventure and we know what's on the horizon. So story elements that we need to introduce, or story elements that have been introduced, and kind of where they are in proximity to our next session, like chronologically, what's coming up next, how do we prioritize what's going to happen in the next session. And then also it allows us to look sort of on a thematic arc, like what are things that the players have ignored or forgotten about, or what are they really fixated on that we need to address, as well as is there a through line or a connection that we can start to kind of to coalesce around to make the payoff to the adventure really feel satisfying and dynamic, right? So not to dynamically address maybe these disparate elements and themes that are popping up sometimes either intentionally because they're within the structure of the adventure, sometimes on an impromptu basis because it's something that I said at the table and the players have latched onto, or it's an idea that I had at the table that I wanted to interject or whatever, right? So you get thrown into the DM Rook. Well, welcome. Usually on Thursdays, I do a lot more open-ended Q&A, right? So Thursdays, normally the show is at 2. I've had some busy things going on. So assuming that in my day job, assuming that everything's cool, you can join me. Usually we have either we reschedule it for the same day at some point. Like today, we pushed it back an hour or so, right? But if you're new, welcome to the show and delve into the format. And today is a lot of me talking. Feel free to ask some questions that are on topic. But Thursdays is more of our general Q&A of like, I'm new to GMing and I don't know what to do about X, Y, or Z. Or my players really threw me for a loop when this happened. Or I did this and I got into trouble. I didn't know how to get out of it. So Thursdays is a great day to come in and ask those general Q&A questions. I usually try and carve out. So I'll carve out some time this Thursday to do that, right? Yes, you can also drop questions in our Discord, and I'll be happy to address them there in whatever manner I can. But it's nice to have it here on stream as like a little more interactive back and forth in real time, and also more of a video archive of what it was, what my thoughts were. There you go. So. Plot radar looks like this. I've broken it into 2 parts. We're going to go away from my face. And the way that plot radar is laid out is it's laid out in a series of columns that are relative to how close the party is to encountering something. Or let's put it this way, to resolving something, right? So Dungeons & Dragons is a series of mysteries or challenges that we unravel. And as we gain more information about the plot and what's going on, the players get further and deeper and deeper into it until they finally build to the central conflict, the moment of climax. They fight that big boss monster, and then they get some treasure, or there's some sort of denouement resolution at the end, whether it's rescue the Duke or what have you, right? All kinds of things. So this is designed to give you a cross-section view, sort of organize your glimpse into how is my adventure unfolding? What have the players forgotten about, and what are they fascinated with, and what do I need to introduce and maybe make some connections to or do some foreshadowing with? All right, so the first column is the first page that we're going to look at is the stuff that's closest to being addressed by the party, the stuff that I really want to prioritize, right? So let's take a look. Happily for you guys, I'm not going to walk through this by drawing the stuff out in real time and talking through it as we go. I wanted to save some time, so I sat down and did it ahead of time. Here we are. So, closed and retired are items or story elements that the party has interacted with or learned enough information about that they have resolved those things. They feel satisfied that they know what they are. They have a firm understanding of what that element's place is within the story, and they're probably not going to pay much more attention to it. Sometimes issues or story elements kind of end up being recurring. They come back, you do a callback to them, and you can sometimes recontextualize them in a new way, and they go, oh, okay. But for the most part, this is sort of like our graveyard of story elements, right? These are things that the party has interacted with and probably either thinks they're resolved or that they think is resolved. Whether that's true or not is up to you as the DM. But things that we wanted to address, story elements that we wanted to address that have come into focus and been defined and understood by our players. So they encountered the doppelganger corpses. That seems they pretty much understand, okay, those are clone templates that were somehow killed in this cataclysm. Great. They did get a starship map and a primer on, okay, the name of this colony ship and what's the big deal. One thing that I didn't really put on here, well, I guess I did. But so one thing that they learned from that is that the optical implant that Thawne, Ranger in the party, has, it has the potential to spy on the party, right? That's maybe, they think that's problematic. So, but they've gotten that little we gave them last session. We gave them that debriefing. They got a copy of the map. They understand it. That's mostly settled. They encountered the first group of veggie pygmies on the ship, and I don't think they really have any inclination to go back there and deal with those guys. So that's the stuff that's closed and retired. Also, we had a language barrier type of issue that was a recurring theme that we had introduced, and they have now overcome that. I should put that on the plot radar here, but it's not there right now. So the next column are the things that I want to address in the next session. And let me just make a note here that if we look at things that are sort of further away, story elements that are further away or maybe not really active in the player's sphere of attention, you as the DM have a tremendous amount of power to move things into their sphere of attention, right? You control the flow of information, and you can bring forward any kind of encounter or story theme or plot element or whatever you want. You can bring that forward as soon as and whenever you want. You have a lot of power as a DM. So don't feel like you just have to respond to, okay, well, the players are investigating this. You can proactively push story elements at them. If you get too heavy-handed with it, it becomes a little railroady, and the players feel like you're just pushing the plot on them. But it's a power that you can use both ways. You can sit back and let the players kind of lead the wagon train in whatever direction they want to do, or you can literally like put encounters in front of the wagon train and force them to at least acknowledge that something's happening or something that's going on, right? So let's take a look at what I want to focus on next session. So the immediate column is what's going on in the next session. So if you did not tune in, and you can tune in here on our Twitch channel or go to the YouTubes and see it. At the end of last session, Avril's parents, her mom called out, "You take your hands off of him, let go of him." She was clearly in peril or distress, and Avril took off and started she started going to try and save them. Just a quick sidebar, DJ Who asked the question, will I lead a session for strangers who are unsure of GMing and want more experience? I actually have done that to some degree. At Gamehole Con, I did a hands-on GM workshop where we actually, I gave sort of a quick rundown of my design and GM philosophy, and we took 30 minutes. Everybody got to design one encounter, and we actually played it as an adventure, taking turns GMing. I gave each person feedback on what I thought they executed well and where I thought they needed some improvement. So, I have done that before. I don't know how easy it would be to do online. But it is, I think, something would be a useful exercise, right? It would be useful not just for the people who are involved, but also for people who are watching and going, oh yeah, again, that's a good tip and stuff. So we will take that under advisement. We'd have to carve out something in the calendar for that. So for tomorrow's game, Avril's parents are very clearly being held by the Tekka Pygmies. I need to design what that area looks like, what they're doing with Avril's parents. Those are pretty big things. And then what are some possible outcomes for either rescuing the parents or interacting with the parents, why were the parents there, etc. I need to introduce a bunch of information about her folks and how they got captured and what their story is and what they know and what they don't know, etc. Right? The other item that I think we need to address is the whole key quest for finding a blue card to get out of this area and get into the main engineering area, because the players are doggedly pursuing, like, we need to find the God's Fire. Where's the God's Fire? They don't have any tools really for doing that, and the only tool that they know is that if I have a blue card, we can get to the area where the God's Fire is. So I think let's get into that. Let's stop. We could put them on a more of an exploratory route of, there's a bunch of obstacles in your way to getting to the God's Fire, right? But honestly, we're so many sessions into this that I think there's a greater story to be told here than just getting to the God's Fire. And I think we need to give them a win, have them feel like they have accomplished something, and then introduce like there's further problems. Like just getting an idea of what this thing is and getting a hold of it is not enough. There's more going on, and now you have to actually solve another problem, right? So that's kind of two of our big issues here is the key quest and then getting to the engineering deck. That's the second part or whatever. And we're gonna snooze that. Snooze. All right, I will pick a time. How about 5:20? Thank you. Okay. Done. How do I do that? Great. Done. Great. Okay. Sorry, I got a Windows Update notification there. And then the I don't know if you want to call it the third or fourth issue that I want to try to address this next session is the cosmology of the heaven, earth, and three hells. I think there's a room to explore that a little bit further. The Vegapygmies had their take on it. I think the Tekapygmies have a different take on it, or their view of the cosmology maybe differs or whatever. I think we can reveal more information about the ship and what's the various interactions are on the ship through the Tekapygmies' take on the whole cosmology of the ship, because the Vegapygmies think that there's a heaven and an earth and there's three hells, and the Tekapygmies maybe have a variant version of that belief, or they have a different take on that, or maybe they don't believe in that religious point of view at all, right? They can certainly have some other, they've already been painted as sort of like the Forsaken or whatever. So that's an opportunity that we don't have to cling to that cosmology, but we can use that as either as a springboard or a contrasting set of beliefs. Maybe the Tekapygmies believe something completely different, and what they believe intersected with what the Vegapygmy believes gives the players a little more context for what's going on. So those are the main items that I think we need to address or somehow incorporate, the main story elements and themes that we need to incorporate into the next session, right? Things that are approaching, right? So the party decided to reconnect to the info stream on behalf of Sebastian, the artificial intelligence, who asked them to do this. Partly so that they could find a blue card, right? I want to kind of get to the blue card a little quicker than letting the info stream reconnection happen. Although that's not to say we couldn't have the info stream reconnection be part of, or have the info stream reconnection be part of this session. Like there could be an accelerated. It's technology, right? It's just like magic. Advanced technology and magic are the same thing. So we could have this info stream reconnection have its repercussions immediately. I think with what we have going on in the session already, we're pretty heavy into events that are going on. I don't know. If I do a little bit of DM finesse, part of the advantage to doing plot radar here is I could say, oh, I can figure out a way to tie this element into what's going on with something else and really pull it together, right? I can make connections across the various columns here and either condense things or streamline things or whatever. So there's an opportunity there, but right now I'm thinking that might happen either in the next session or 2 sessions out, whatever. The players are at some point are going to have to explore the Earth deck, which is the zoo or whatever you want to call it. I don't think that's happening next session. I'd really like to kind of like just streamline them right down in the engineering area. Maybe they don't get directly to the God's Fire, but they get a feel for, okay, well, what's this place like and how do we get there? Maybe they get a map of the engineering deck. That's something that I would consider, right? But the Earth deck is probably on hold right now. And then finally, the secret of the God's Fire, right? So they've been given a bunch of hints that it's very clear that God's Fire is somehow radiant energy. It's also radiation. Their characters don't know what that is, but that was dropped blatantly last session. But the secret of the God's Fire would be, how do you harness it? How do you use it? Can it be manipulated, etc., etc., etc.? There's some really, I think, fascinating opportunities there for, with this idea that the ship somehow contains a generator or doorhold of quote unquote divine energy. Like that to me is pretty fascinating because you have a lot of themes that come together in terms of like, oh, this gives you a bunch of magic power. You know, I think that idea that there's a well of magical energy to draw upon, but I think that this is specifically divine energy really poses some interesting opportunities for us, right? Um, that's where we're at with the uh, current. Wow, bad typing. That's where we're at with the current kind of the next session or two sessions, right? I think they'll get to engineering and we'll discover the secret of the God's Fire may be something to do with it next session. And that may lead us to the Earth deck, or the info stream reconnection may have some repercussions that we don't know about. Further out on the plot radar, these are elements that have kind of, they're either not in the immediate sphere of things that are going to pop up, or they're things that are kind of just dangling out there that we're not planning to address in the near future, right? This didn't, let me fix this. Sorry about this. I don't know why this is weird. I moved the wrong thing. How did I move the wrong thing? What am I moving? Oh, I know what I'm moving. All right, this thing. Oh, yeah, this is way wrong. Let me resize this. There we go. I must have moved it somehow. All right. So, these are things that are just sort of out there, right? So Grayson had a vision in the last adventure. He had a vision of the future. That has yet to be fulfilled. That's just out there. I don't know. That could be a dormant kind of thing, too. Ava, Megan's character, has been given this mission for Barshala's sacred vessel to create a sacred vessel for her goddess. That needs to be addressed at some point. And then also there's this whole thing of that there's ghost children. They're basically doppelgangers on the ship that the ship can't see somehow. The mechanical pieces of the ship don't recognize. That needs to be introduced at some point. In terms of DJ, I'll quick jump on your question here, just very briefly. So the best advice that I have is, I would say if you get involved with your local D&D Adventurers League group, they occasionally, maybe like once every 3 months or so, will have, at least here in LA, they will have a DM workshop of tips and tricks on here's how to run a good Adventurers League game, and a lot of times that carries over into just your regular home game, right? So I would go to the hobby shop and see like how active. You're in Phoenix, so I would think it would. Well, you're in Arizona someplace. I would think there'd be some sort of active Adventurers League group in that area. So go to your hobby shop and see what's going on, or check Facebook for a group there, right? So let's finish off our plot radar here. So then we have some things that are dormant, right? Now, one of the things that's dormant is Sebastian the AI. They have just sort of really unquestioningly adopted his mission of please reinstate the info stream and I'll be able to help you, and life on the better will be awesome, right? Is that true or not? We don't know. That's dormant. That is to be determined. That's something that I call a Schrodinger's clue, right? So the actual specifics around that story element have not been resolved by the party, and therefore they're eligible to sort of be fudged around a little bit. It's that story element is malleable, right? So it could turn out that Sebastian has some sort of nefarious role in what's going on the ship, or Sebastian is honestly just as the appearances presented itself, just some sort of friendly, benevolent AI who wants to get the ship back on track. Other things that are dormant, Xanathar is obviously out there lurking somewhere, going to probably take some sort of action somewhere far, far down the road, but we've sort of buried that one. The players have sort of let that one go for the time being. Similarly, Thon's father and his, the resolution of his storyline, that's also dormant. We're not planning to address that in the immediate next, like 2 or 3 sessions, or even 4 sessions, right? The players were told at some point that Torm has left the ship. That's dormant. That could certainly come back at some point. I think that it was deliberately dropped into the conversation, and the players didn't really pick up on it or pay any attention to it, and that's fine. But again, this is where you as the DM have the power to very deftly re-inject that story element back in and bring it back into their sphere of attention. And then I think the final thing on the plot radar that has sort of gone by the wayside here is the nature of the cataclysm. They've learned some information about what happened, but they don't really fully understand it, I don't think, at least in the way that I've conceived of it. And that's fine. Again, this is something, since it's dormant, I can let it go. I don't have to tell, it doesn't have to play an important role at it anymore if I don't want it to. You don't have to feel beholden to resolve all of those loose threads. It can really drag the game out if you try to. On the other hand, it's important to look at it as an opportunity to create some connections with other elements that maybe we have going on, a little earlier in our adventure, etc. Right? So if you can find things on the back end that tie into things that are currently going on, you really get a nice kind of weave of your plot threads and your clues and your elements, and the players think you're a genius for bringing all this stuff together. So that's the purpose of Plot Radar. That's where we're at for those of you who are following along in the storyline. That's where I think if we look at our main focus tomorrow, we're going to look on dealing with the Tech Pygmies, dealing with whatever the outcome is in terms of making a rescue effort toward Avril's parents. And then let's stovepipe this blue key quest thing to get them into engineering and feel at least that they're like on the doorstep of unveiling the God's Fire, if not encountering it directly. I think those are our 3 big issues that we're facing tomorrow. And if I can incorporate something from further down the Plot Radar pathway, so much the better. So that's where we're at with that. Very cool. I'm glad to see that we have new people in the chat. And let me just turn my phone down. And now I want to talk about something that is a little bit a little broader, a little more general. And the reason that this came up was I was looking at, so the Tech-A-Pygmy stuff isn't particularly well defined in the adventure as written. And it's defined, but it's not particularly interesting, right? It's a bunch of veggie pygmies with weird energy weapons who want to kill you. And that's a fine premise for a tournament module, in AD&D in 1980. But we're trying to tell a story, and we want to really make that kind of like that encounter shine a little bit more, right? So how do we go about doing that? And this really gets into some kind of holistic DM philosophy stuff that is still a little rough around the edges, but I want to share with you as something that I encourage you to kind of reflect on and try and incorporate into your own DMing and your own encounter design, right? And this is all predicated off the idea that time is precious, right? So I think that most modules, most adventures, too often are set up around a page count, right? And then this is like a time told, like just an artifact of D&D coming out of a printed book tradition and coming out of the late 70s and the 70s and 80s, right? Which is, okay, we got to hit our 32 page count. How do we fill that out? And there's really no focus put on each and every encounter being a jewel and being important and relevant to the players, right? The early adventures it's not really important what's revealed. It's just you get dropped in one end of the dungeon and you march your way to the other end where you fight the big bad guy and you get the treasure and you level up, right? It was fairly, that's the dungeon in its most simplistic kind of primordial form. And what happens along the way is mostly grinding, right? Either monsters or traps or maybe an occasional role-playing encounter, right? So, I think in a modern play style, at least for me in my experience, when I was a teenager, that playstyle suited me perfectly because I didn't have a computer, I didn't have a phone that had games on it, and I could play those games and grind and have a great time because I couldn't wait to get to that next level and gain that new next ability. And also when I was a teenager, I could literally play D&D 3 days out of the week, Friday night, Saturday all day, and then Sunday afternoon if I wanted to, and especially in the summers or whatever, right? Time was not a limiting factor. Now that I'm older, number one, that satisfaction of grinding up to the next level isn't a huge motivating factor for me, right? It's only nice in that, well, when I unlock a new ability, it develops my character and gives them new abilities. It's an opportunity to look for a new way for my character to do something or mark an event in my character's lifetime. But the other piece of this is that now that I'm adult and I have other commitments and other things going on, the time I spend at the table is a lot more precious than when I was 16 and we had this whole summer ahead of us and all I had to worry about was nothing. I didn't have a summer job when I was 16, right? It was like literally like, do we want to ride bikes or play D&D today? It's kind of what it came down to, right? Now that I'm adult, my time is more valuable to me, and therefore each of those encounters really needs kind of a focus and a purpose and a pop that makes it worthwhile, makes it worth exploring to some degree. So with that being the preamble here, that's where this approach is coming from, is let's not have extraneous encounters where the players don't understand why they happened. Let's have encounters with a purpose, right? So let's take a look at 5 questions that I've come up with that I think you should ask yourself about every encounter that you're planning to include with your players. Whether it's something that you write yourself or it's something that you found in the adventure. They're like, oh, okay, none of this happens. All right. I think this will help you either design better encounters from the front end, or it will help you refine encounters that you read in existing material and go, okay, I can polish this, I can make this better, right? So, first 2 are kind of big ones. So the first question you should ask yourself, and I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but what is the purpose of this encounter? Now, when I originally talked about it, I applied it to random encounters, but I believe it applies to every single encounter. Right. So what function within the ongoing story, within the narrative arc that you are building, what purpose does this encounter serve? Does it paint the world? Does it evoke the wonder of the world? Does it convey clues about a mystery or maybe introduce circumstances of a mystery? One thing I do want to say about this is we deal a lot with mysteries in D&D. Everything that you introduce is a clue, even if it may be a really vague clue. Oh, I know a smog that smells vaguely of cinnamon rolls through the area, and then they might find out, okay, well, somebody was murdered, an hour ago or something like that. That smog may not seem meaningful. It may feel like just sort of like a special effect, sort of like you're describing the world. I would argue it's actually a clue, right? It's a very vague clue that maybe they can't attach a lot of meaning to, but it's a clue. So I don't really say like I've thought about this, and it's like you're not complicating and resolving mysteries. You're just introducing a series of clues that convey different amounts of information. other purposes for an encounter. You might foreshadow a threat. Oftentimes, this is like who the big boss is, who's behind stuff. You might also foreshadow like some sort of vulnerability that they have. Basically, like revealing information about something that's coming later. That might be the purpose of an encounter. An encounter might simply change the pace or tone of what's going on, right? So our players might be tired of this kind of very heady sort of investigation that we're doing. We might want to throw them a bone and change the pace of what's going on, shift into a different mode, and have just kind of a nice frivolous, for all intents and purposes, a frivolous combat or an easy combat, right? Shift the tone of what's happening from very serious to whimsical, or maybe shift the pace of what's happening from this long, kind of drawn out, like aimless, sometimes interrogation of an NPC into a very compact, precise, structured combat that takes 15, 20 minutes or whatever. So that's something that's a function that your encounter might have. It might simply be there to drain resources, and I always give a word of caution with this particular purpose, because the fundamental game mechanism behind D&D is essentially to drain resources, right? It is to whittle away at your hit points and use up your spell slots, and hopefully you end up having more hit points than the monsters that you're facing, right? But combat in Dungeons and Dragons really is kind of a march of attrition of resources. Who can drain resources? Who can drain their opponent's resources faster than they get their resources drained, right? So that's yeah. So just parenthetically here, there's a lot of great discussion going on in chat, but I'm going to stay on topic today. I love to take your questions on Thursday. So try not to get frustrated if maybe there's not a lot of discussion getting batted back and forth, but come back on Thursday and we'll talk about some of these issues, especially for first-time GMs, like how do you prep and all that, how long does prep take, et cetera, et cetera. I'm happy to have that conversation on Thursday, right? So stick with us. Stick with us. I have a little bit of a lecture prepared today, if you want to call it that. You can also, as Dom points out, you can also drop questions in our Discord. So so be careful with draining resources. That's kind of the most boring option, and unless it ties into one of the other purposes, I think it's dangerous. The purpose of an encounter might be to issue a reward, whether that's the players will level up when they defeat this encounter, or they'll find a really cool item, or it's just time for them to, if they fight their way through this last stand of goblins, they'll find a safe place that they can rest, whatever that reward is. It could be money, etc., right? So that's that. And then finally, you can offer them a tough choice. Okay, it could be easier to get a map from the shifty merchant who asks you to ferry this magic item through the caves of fiery Doomwater or whatever it is and deliver it to so-and-so at the village on the other side. That might be quicker, but you might not trust this guy. You're not sure what you're bringing to this dude or whatever. So offering the players a tough choice is oftentimes a compelling way to make the game make them feel like there's more risk for reward to be balanced there, right? I mean, D&D is ultimately a game of balancing the risk that you're exposed to versus the reward that you get on the other side. And as the DM, your job is to try and make those things like high risk, high reward, keep them kind of in sync, right? Where if it's too low a risk and too high of a reward, then it feels like the game's too easy. Conversely, if it's too high of a risk, too low of a risk and too high of a reward makes the game Monty Hall campaigns too easy. Too high of a risk and not enough reward can get the players frustrated. It's too hard. It's too grim and gritty. It's just not worth the grind, right? I tend to live in this place a little bit more, but I try to, if you have a story reward and the players feel like they're learning stuff, that can make up for not getting XP, not getting gold, not getting treasure, right? So if they feel like they're learning stuff or there's opportunities for character development, that can offset you making challenges tougher. So keep that in mind. Offering a tough choice enables the players to kind of turn the dials and knobs on how much risk reward they want to pursue. So, what is the purpose of this encounter? That's the first thing you want to ask yourself about an encounter, whether you're designing it or whether you are adapting it or just planning to run it out of the book, right? That's important. The next question I think you should ask yourself is, what is in fact the challenge here? What is the obstacle that is on offer? Whether that's, there's this huge gorge that they have to try and cross, or there's a troll who stands between them and the cave that leads to freedom, or maybe it's a gorge that they have to cross, but they have to defeat a troll in order to get across it, or there's a troll on the other side, whatever it is. What is the obstacle here? Ask yourself, okay, well, what am I challenging the party with? Because your job as the DM is to issue a challenge, issue that risk, right? Give them an obstacle, and then when they overcome it, then they get the appropriate reward. So question 2 is pretty straightforward in terms of, what is the challenge here? Is it a combat encounter? Is it a role-playing encounter? Is it a trap that needs defeated? Is it a puzzle that needs to be solved? What is the nature of the challenge? And then maybe more importantly, is how can this particular challenge be adjusted, short-circuited, heightened? Think about ways that if the game is not going the way that you want it to, think about ways that you will be able to either make this challenge more interesting on the fly, either add in another wave of troops or whatever it is, or shorten it, like ways that the party could short-circuit it or avoid it, mitigate their risk, or if this encounter is just gonna, you're running out of time, like, how do I figure out a way to get out of this thing, right? That's the second thing. Our regular D&D show is called the Iron Keep Chronicles. That's on Wednesday night. You can see us play Expedition of the Buried Peaks every night at 8 Pacific here on Save and Throw Show. You can also either catch us in our VOD Twitch archives or watch us on YouTube. So this is the prep show for the Iron Keep. The Iron Keep Chronicles. Dun, dun, dun. You can also get some fancy merch at our store. So think about, okay, well, do I want to give this troll some extra armor? Do I want to give him a cool weapon? Do I want to switch things up and make him immune to fire or resistant to fire? Do I want to make him especially susceptible or afraid of something? Those are all challenges or ways that the challenge itself can be adjusted, shortened, or heightened. And thinking about those things helps keep the game on pace, right? So going back to our fundamental premise that we're operating from, time is precious. Combat eats a lot of time. So how can I take any given encounter, whether it's a puzzle or a trap or whatever, and think about, okay, well, what would be a good way to compress this without making it too easy, or conversely, making it too deadly, or kind of sucking the life out of it. We've all done that thing where we roll dice and combat starts, and you get into this fight, and everybody pumped, like, oh yeah, we're having this big combat, and then they realize that this dude only has like 45 hit points, and by the time they get to the end, you're like, okay, and you run your sword through his chest, and he dies. And they're like, oh, well, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have cast Spirit Guardians. That goes for like another 10 rounds. Forget this is dumb, right? So asking yourself that question is a way to prepare for the eventuality that either combat might go too long or combat might be too short and disappointing. All right, those are our first 2 questions. Our final 3 questions. This maybe should actually be higher, but I think you have to address the first 2 questions before you can address the third one, right? What is fun about this encounter? What is the challenge here? What makes this interesting? Is it just a straight up fight that doesn't have any twists and turns to it? If so, ask yourself, like, what's fun about it? How can I make it more tactical or more interesting? And especially ask yourself, what type of player does this appeal to, right? So there's the player who is the war gamer, there, who wants to have that fight and wants to get on the battle mat and get real tactical, move things around, and get in a flanking position, and try and drive somebody off the cliff. And then there's the person who is maybe more of the shifty thief who wants to think through things and trick people out of stuff and find short circuits around encounters that do not involve directly confronting them in a stand-up fight, right? Maybe it involves sneaking around and stabbing them in the back or taking the guard out like from a sniper post or whatever it is, right? But and then there's the puzzle solvers and the role players and that sort of thing. You can do some more investigating on your own in terms of what type of player it is, but I think it's important to ask yourself, what's fundamentally fun? Why is this fun? I don't think we ask ourselves as DMs that question enough. I think we assume that there's fun baked into it. Oh, well, they fight a troll and 6 goblins. That's fun. Maybe. It might not be. It might be really kind of tedious and boring. So ask yourself, what's fun about this encounter, and what sort of players does it appeal to, and are those players at my table? And when was the last time that I appealed to each individual person at the table? When was the last time I did an encounter that like they really felt like the spotlight shone on them, or it was really keyed in with their abilities and their aptitudes as a player, and it gave them that opportunity to kind of get some satisfaction out of the game, right? So what's fun about it, and how does that intersect with the type of fun that my players enjoy? Very important point is that what you think is fun isn't always what the players think is fun. Yes, you're running the game for your enjoyment to some degree. You have an incredible amount of control over what happens, so you should be able to bake that in while simultaneously servicing your players' needs and the things that they get off on in terms of fun and enjoyment and play style and whatnot, right? If you can't marry those two, then find a different group. I guarantee you there's another group out there who's looking for a DM. This is almost a subset of the next question. However, I think it's distinct enough that it deserves its own consideration. And that is, what is an element that the players can manipulate? And this is a consideration that I don't think we give enough credence to. All right? In other words, is there something in the terrain, or is there something baked into the encounter that the players can manipulate, take advantage of, somehow sink their hooks into and change or alter the premise or the setup of the situation, right? It could be something as simple as, oh, there's a choir loft up there, and anybody who's up there, is in an advantageous sniper position or whatever, right? It's ideal for ranged casters. So that's something that you could incorporate. It could be something like this area is filled with magical energy, and any spellcasters who use spells in this area, if those spells are conjuration magic, they automatically have a wild magic effect. Okay. On the one hand, that could really punish the players. On the other hand, if they figure out like, oh, it's only conjuration spells, they could use that to their advantage, right? And that takes an encounter. It takes it out of your hands and puts it more in the purview of the players to manipulate the given circumstances of the encounter in a way that they'll find favorable. And it's a way for a different play style to emerge that isn't reliant upon what the player character's abilities are. It's more reliant on how inventive the players themselves can be, and that's always a hugely satisfying outcome, right? Is if the players thought of something and they go, oh, you didn't think of that, or if they can come up with something that is not dictated by an ability on their character sheet, but is unlocked through the power of their imagination, that's a huge payoff. That gets people sucked into your game and they want to keep playing because they're like, oh, remember when we had that fight on the swaying iron bell that was dangling over the huge pit of lava, and I kicked that guy off and he fell down and burnt up or whatever it was, right? Those make for memorable moments when the players actually not only take what's given in the game but supersede it and go beyond and come up with it's like good improv, right? You take that good suggestion that you've been given and then you take it to another level and you connect it to a greater goal or a greater outcome than what the audience predicted when they gave you, a head of cabbage or whatever it was, right? Emperor Riptide, I'll get to your question in just a moment. Like I said, we're gonna tackle a lot of these on Thursday. I got one last thing that I think you should ask yourself when you're either designing or looking at the encounters that your party is going to run into. And this again is important. What's revealed at the end, right? So what information is revealed at the end of the encounter? And yeah, it's important to think of the material rewards in terms of, okay, what, is there do they get a magic item? Do they get some amount of money? Do they get XP? Like, is there a reward at the end of the encounter? Sure, that's fine. But if we look at this from the perspective that time is precious and we're pursuing a narrative arc that we're building in conjunction with the players, the way that I elicit a response, that I can get the players to act in my world, is by giving them information about my world. And that information should evolve and change, at least the information about the storyline should evolve and change as you proceed through the adventure, right? Ideally, they also learn more things about the world that they're adventuring in. But, on a granular level, they're pursuing the story and they happen to be adventuring in the larger world. So in order for the story to progress, in order for them to act on the story, they need to have more information about what's happening in the story. Sure, sometimes it could be a misdirect, but it's important to reveal something to the players. And I think it's important to reveal something to players at the end of every encounter. This encounter should shed light, whether it is a page from the journal that says, I wish I had never signed up with King Dunsmuir's forces. Oh, okay, this guy's part of Dunsmuir's army. Oh, that makes sense. We ran into his lieutenant was recruiting in the last village. I wonder if maybe he's up to something bigger that's going on here, right? So it's whether it's a simple journal entry or other clue or whatever it is, revealing information about the story. What is revealed at the end of this encounter that helps the players make a decision about what they proactively want to do next, right? Now, to take that one step further, ask yourself, what sort of twist or extra information could be revealed? Could we shed light on a side plot or an NPC that they've encountered or an NPC they're going to encounter? Or could we twist something that they already understand and realize, oh, wait a minute. No, it turns out that bartender must have been recruiting for King Dunsmuir's, general the entire time. Dun, dun, dun. And I'm just making this stuff up off the top of my head. But the point is, if you can suddenly recontextualize what they know with the information that comes out of the back end of this encounter, oh, okay, they have that aha moment. Oh, I get it. You have to be careful. You don't want to put too many twists in, but it's a bonus. Also, I also believe you can always find a way to pack extra info, and either it doesn't have to be extra info that is new, right? Sometimes the players lose a plot thread or lose track of some story elements, and you can reinforce it. sometimes just confirmation of something that they already know helps them solidify, like, okay, we know the king's general is crooked. We know that he's building a mercenary force that the king doesn't know about. Okay, once again, we've got that confirmed. So extra information doesn't necessarily have to be something that's completely brand new, and it doesn't have to be a big surprise twist where everybody goes, "Whoa, no, oh, okay, I see it now." It doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that complicated, right? Or that deft. It can be reinforcing something that they already know, confirming information that they've gathered. Sometimes players just need a little bit of like a pat on the back, like, yep, you're correct about these things. You're right about these things. So that's the last of the five, of the five questions here that I think are germane. So if we look at this, it's more of a holistic approach. I don't know if I'm using that word right, but it's more of a meta kind of analysis of encounter design. This is not going to help you, like, what's an appropriate challenge for your players. It'll force you to think about that, but this is really designed around, like, how can I get the most bang for the buck out of each of my encounters? Well, let's walk through and ask myself, what's the actual purpose of this encounter? Is it just a mindless combat encounter that doesn't have any payoff at the end? Let's think about how we can change that so that it does something else, like maybe foreshadow a threat or a vulnerability, or maybe it changes the pace of what's going on. What's the challenge here? How can I amplify or attenuate whatever the challenge is? How can I make this situation run a little bit tighter, a little bit leaner, a little bit meaner? Is it too complicated? Is it too straightforward and paper thin and just not interesting enough? What's fun about this encounter? What is the fun thing of what we're doing here? Is it just us sitting around and relaxing, and maybe we're running a casual game and don't really care that much about, like, the plot is the plot, but we're just sort of having a beer and pretzels bog standard game of Dungeons and Dragons where I get to level up and, give the guy playing the cleric crap and, revel in rolling high or low or whatever it is. Maybe the game is that simple, and it isn't necessarily a hugely well-defined narrative arc that's compelling and intriguing. But what is fun about this encounter? Regardless of what style of game, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what's fun, and what kind of players are going to really indulge themselves with this particular encounter? What's an element the players can manipulate? Is there something the players can learn about that's interesting, dynamic, unique, potentially, that they can investigate and then somehow take advantage of? That doesn't mean that the bad guys can't also take advantage of it too, but what's something that's not standard about this situation? What's the extra kind of, like, juice that this particular encounter has to make it a little extra interesting, a little compelling, but specifically something that the players and the party can manipulate, that they can get a hook into and go, oh, you know what? If we just dumped all this stuff out, we'd have this big pool of oil that we can somehow use. Like, maybe we can set it on fire or something. Cool. And while I'm thinking of it, Mike Shea, who goes by Sly Flourish on Twitter, has a Kickstarter going right now for a book he calls Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. And he definitely has a bunch of cool ideas in terms of, like, how do I make this encounter have a little more pizzazz? What can I change about the terrain or whatever? And that Kickstarter only has a few days left. I think it has like 4 or 5 days left. So if you're interested in it, it actually has two books. His original Lazy Dungeon Master book, and now his Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. I'm a backer. I sometimes recommend stuff just because I believe in it, but I'm actually a backer on this, and I recommend you go check it out. And then finally, again, what information is revealed at the end? What's the twist? What's the extra info? What is the outcome? Whether it reinforces something that they've latched onto that they don't 100% know, or it reveals something new, another development along the arc of the storyline that helps give them information about how to proceed next, what opposition they're facing, what's the modus operandi of the villains who are at play, what's the nature of the plague that's cursing the land, etc. You know, the player's actions, the fuel for the player's actions is information, and if you're starving them of information, their interest rapidly kind of just literally runs out of gas. They're like, I don't. I guess we do this. I guess we try and find a blue card because I don't know what to do next, right? And I say that because I think there are moments in our own game where we've kind of like stalled out, like we're not sure what to pursue, so we're going to pursue this one thing. So, yeah. 3 days left on Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. Get in now. Why not? Why not pledge right now? So that's my quick primer, or it's not really a primer. It's just my quick questionnaire that I think you should ask yourselves in terms of what's this encounter do? How am I using my time at the table with my players for maximum benefit, both for myself, so I can get some fun out of presenting this interesting scenario to my players, and also for my players so that they can feel appropriately challenged to take the proper amount of risk and then get a reward out of the back end. And remember, don't discount information as one of the rewards. In fact, is maybe the most crucial rewards, because having money, having treasure, having XP doesn't do anything for you if you don't know where to go next. If you don't know who's behind this, who should we attack, where should we explore, how do we get into the forbidden maze, whatever it is. So, those are my thoughts. Is there anything that most of the things that came up in chat today, I'm going to tackle on Thursday. So stay tuned. I'm gonna see if there's anything I can quick clean up here. We're a little over time, and I've got some things I got to do tonight yet, so I can't stay too long and address all these things. We will pick them up on Thursday. How willing are you to kill an NPC or a TPK? Will you allow the psychology of your NPCs to take over combat, or will you show mercy? I mean, there's an interesting implicit assumption there, which is that all NPCs want to kill the party. I think if you ask yourself, what are some outcomes that don't involve killing the party? What are some reasons that an NPC might want to capture or negotiate with the party, make them an offer? Then you'll find that your combats are going to take on a whole new kind of interesting angle, right? So, example from our game, they were fighting these weird security robots, but the security robots, for the most part, were not trying to out and out kill them. There were a few occasions where they used lethal force, but for the most part, it was, I'm dropping a gas grenade to put you to sleep. I'm using my weird tentacles to wrap you up and take you out of the combat. I'm using a tractor beam to literally like lift you up and pull you into the air. These security robots clearly wanted to take the party someplace. Now, they never figured out where, but that's, quote unquote, a TPK that doesn't have the outcome of a TPK. It has the outcome of the players, the party wakes up in new environments and they're being held captive by somebody, right? At least that's one outcome. So ask yourself, like, why am I, if the overriding assumption is my NPCs want to kill the party, you got to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why am I only making that one choice? It's not necessarily a bad choice, but if you're just hammering that one note, your story development starts to become a little one note, right? The other thing that I would suggest is, if every NPC wants to kill the rest of the party, and every NPC decides they're going to fight to the death, this is a play style that I used all the time when I was developing my career as a DM, especially in the early days. You rapidly find yourself in the position where you can't reveal that, our last point on the slide here, what's revealed at the end of this encounter. You can't reveal information in a very interactive and dynamic way if everybody's dead. You do come up with the conundrum of what do we do with the guy once we've captured him and interrogated him to our satisfaction. Like, that's an obstacle that you have to sort through with your party depending upon what their alignment is and what their personal taste is in terms of negotiating with somebody that they've captured. And I've seen parties, run the gamut on that. But the point is, you can reveal a lot more information with a guy who's been beaten to within 2 hit points of his life and decides to surrender than you can with a corpse that's been beaten to negative 2 hit points of its life and is dead. Then you have to start dropping clues like, oh, he had a journal that explains what he's been up to for the past, what, past 3 years? Yeah, but a lot of the pages are waterlogged. Like, those sorts of excuses start to run thin pretty quickly. The idea that your NPCs want to save their own skins is an idea that is timeless, right? That's a motivation almost everybody will buy off on. So I will kill, I will knock down a PC. I will very rarely kill a PC. I think that's a stylistic question that you have to settle with your gaming group. And ideally, I would encourage you to settle it either out of game or out of game, not, like take a pause and go, either at the beginning of a session or at the end of the session, go, is this gritty enough for you guys? I want to play this like a little tougher. I want to play a little more punchy in the teeth, but I don't know that's going to be fun for you. Are you guys comfortable with that? Like if there was real skin in the game and your PCs were really in danger and I amped up the level of the challenge, or are you happy with the way it is? Are you going to be mad if your PC dies? I would say that if any of the characters in our current party died a senseless death or arbitrary death, those players would be mad. They've invested a lot in that character, and unless resurrection is very quick and available, and I think honestly, kind of like Critical Role does a little bit of a disservice in that it seems like resurrection is an option that's on the table, unless Matt works really hard at taking it off the table. And again, it gives the impression that, well, they should be able to get resurrected any place to everybody else. I don't think that's the major play style. It's certainly not mine, that at the drop of a hat, you're just going to get raised. Whatever. I mean, that's an idle observation. So settle that either ahead of the time before the campaign starts, or settle that out of session. Because I think a noble sacrifice of a death is interesting and serves as a kind of a perfect period to the end of a character's adventuring arc. But I think a senseless or arbitrary death is not fun for the PCs. And unless you have an agreement ahead of time that says, I'm going to play that way and I'm going to play my NPCs as tough as possible, and I expect you to play your characters as tough as possible, take no prisoners, no holds barred. Unless you have that kind of social contract agreement, I think it's dangerous territory. I'm not saying you shouldn't challenge them, right? That's what it's always about. But you need to, as we said earlier, you need to balance that. This one? That challenge, that risk, versus whatever reward they get. I worry when I get my players thinking I wasn't playing fair, and when I get close to killing them, they get a bit bitter about it. All right, well, you've made an observation about your game, right, and what your players want. You should talk with them about it. The other question I would have is, are you fudging any of the characters' abilities or adding extra monsters or upping hit points or anything like that? And do they have any reason to notice that you've been doing that? Maybe they do think you're playing unfair. Okay. I'm not saying that you can't adjust circumstances on the fly. That was certainly part of our discussion earlier today. But some of it is, do the players know that you're doing it, and do they feel like that's cheating? One thing that I have found helps tremendously, and this is a very simple tip, is roll all of your dice out in the open. If your players see that you rolled a 3 and a 5, they know that you're not softballing them. And you go, okay, well, that guy missed. Similarly, if you roll a nat 20 and a 19 and another nat 20 right in front of them, they can't blame you for dogpiling on them. It can be a little frightening if you're like, oh, I want to manage the tone of the game, and I want to manage how much, what the pacing is and how much damage gets pushed out there and things like that. But I will say you gain an immense amount of trust from your players when you roll your dice out in the open, and that includes damage. I started doing that with 5th edition because we were playtesting 5th edition, and I didn't want the temptation of going, oh, that guy hits. I wanted to kind of play test the game like straight up for what